Well, good morning, everybody. I do appreciate everybody's time on this Saturday. We hope that this is a fruitful discussion and appreciate the opportunity to focus on a topic like this for an extended duration without having to move on to other topics. So we do want to use microphones today so that we can capture everything into the live stream and into the recording for the record. So just a reminder to do that. But this is the intention of today is to really focus on the 1.5 million that has been earmarked for affordable housing with our ARPA funds. And so we heard from at least a majority of you that there has been some interest in kind of figuring out how do we get these dollars out the door? How do we best expend these funds in a way that benefits our community? And so this is new for the town, of course. This is a new space for us. And so Malia has been given the task of kind of diving in and sort of getting up to speed on what would be some of the potential options that the town could pursue to expend these funds. And so we expect this to be probably the first of multiple conversations with the board, but really what we're looking to do is kind of explore some of those options that fit within what we're allowed to do and kind of some of the benefits and some of the challenges that could be presented from each of those. And what we're hoping is to at least hear kind of what direction might you like to go in? Are there options that you say, you know, maybe that's a second phase for us, or maybe that's something to consider later versus, hey, let's at least keep this option on the table for staff to then know where to kind of dive in and do additional research, bring back more detailed options after today. So that's really the purpose of bringing us together. There's certainly going to be lots of opportunity for discussion and input from all of you. But with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Malia, who will be leading us today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's having a good Saturday morning. So I'm excited to talk about affordable housing today. And as we start this discussion, as Becky mentioned, this is the first of many. We want to, as we go through the presentation today and talk about the different concepts today, what I'd like to do is have you think about some collective philosophy and goals. One, as you're thinking about affordable housing, understanding that this is something that we're not going to solve today. We're probably not even going to solve it in the next decade, but we can always look to move the needle around this area. So as we're talking through these different concepts and options, what I'd like for you to do is think about, as a board, what does success look like using available resources? And when I mention success, more so, what is your vision as a board around affordable housing? What is the footprint that you'd like to leave as a board or establish as a board around affordable housing? Also, as you're thinking about this topic, it's important to understand, who do we want to serve? So, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but in the affordable housing space, you have a couple of different populations. You have those that are cost burdened. So those are individuals and families whose housing costs are greater than 30% of their gross income. And just to give you an idea, that can be any of us in the room. So it's not limited to a particular income bracket. You also have, and this is what the federal government uses under the Department of Housing and Urban Development, you also have a group of individuals and families who are, who fall within a certain area median income. And so when you think about affordable housing programs, services, you're thinking about it from the lens of those who fall within 80% or below the area median income. And just to give you an idea, because I think it's super important to put sometimes faces and jobs with these different brackets and groups. So someone who is between like 80 and 120% of area median income could be a professor, a civil engineer, a town director, department head. When you think about someone who falls within 50 to 80% of the area median income, those are folks like your teachers or your fire captain or police sergeant. So as you can see, it's a varying range of different jobs and different categories. And then when you think about someone who falls within 30 to 50% of area median income, and I needed to note that this is based on a household of 4 individuals, those folks are like your medic workers, your public works maintenance and workers, or your equipment operators. So I'm sharing that so that you have somewhat of a visual of the folks that we're talking about as we go through the different programs and options today pertaining to affordable housing. We also have this other population, elderly and disabled. So as you think about who do we want to serve in this space, likely the elderly and disabled, some of those individuals will fall into the cost burden as well as fall in one of those area median income levels. But you also have them as specialized populations that the federal government has set aside particular programs for those groups of individuals. One other area that I like for you to think about as a board as we continue to talk about this topic is what policy and process opportunities and or gaps can be closed as we move forward and pursue different activities and initiatives in this area. Just wanted to remind you that we are currently awaiting the completion of the Urban Institute Affordable Housing Study. So that report should be completed sometime in January of 2023. We will be bringing that back to the board and sharing that information with you. And so wanted to make sure that today, while we talk about that, there will be more information to follow that will give you a better picture of Matthews and what does affordable housing look like here, or what are some options to consider. Did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to ask John Urban if he's going to have that study done by January. A little bit of levity for an early Saturday morning. Sorry.
And then the last thing that I asked that you consider as we talk today is how do we leverage and create future resource capacity? So I mentioned this earlier, Becky has mentioned this is a huge topic and it has a lot of moving pieces. A lot of municipalities and groups have specific departments who are dedicated to doing this work every day and administering these different programs. So as we think about what does this look like for Matthews, that is an important question to keep in mind. How do we leverage partnerships that we may currently have? And how do we create future opportunities and resource capacity so that we're able to really administer and move the activities around affordable housing here in Matthews? So specifically for today, there are 2 goals that I'm hoping that we accomplish. Considering the $1.5 million earmark, where do we focus affordable housing efforts now? We will talk a lot about some concepts and ideas. One of the things that I will ask of this group is that we create a parking lot. So as we talk and get into conversations, it may take us down a couple of different roads and pathways, and that is fantastic. But if we find that we're trying to maybe discuss process, or maybe there's some additional information that we might need to bring to you, then my ask will be that we parking lot that and bring back information to you at a later time. Based on what is shared today, we also like to accomplish what areas would the board like the staff to further pursue in support of desired outcomes that you may have related to affordable housing. So we hope to focus on those two goals, accomplish those two goals. If there is a need for us to add information in a parking lot, I hope that we will be open to that. And it is just that, a parking lot. We will definitely revisit at a later time. Any questions at this point? So as we level set, I think it's important to recap what just kind of some history around the 1.5. So in June 2021, the board earmarked 1.5 million of ARPA funds for affordable housing. This was not an encumbrance, it was an earmark. And so before I go on, I want to just make sure that we all are comfortable and understand that it was a $1.5 million earmark, not necessarily an encumbrance. Did anybody have any?
Can you explain the difference in those two terms?
So the earmark was part of a motion and an approval related to the annual budget that year that the board at the time made a commitment, a verbal commitment that was unanimously voted on to spend the 1.5 million on ARPA funds. That is really kind of a promise more than an obligation. And so there was not formal action that actually encumbered the funds in a way that we wouldn't be able to undo that. So we know that the board has changed a little bit. Not everybody who's in this room was a part of that vote. And so we just want to make sure that there is at least majority consensus to continue to move forward with the 1.5 for this purpose. Because we know we've seen a little bit of back and forth that there may be some different opinions on that. So we just want to create space to make sure that there's at least a majority interest to continue this conversation with spending the funds for this purpose.
Would it be helpful at this point to stop and gauge that interest before we continue?
Yes.
The next 3 hours.
Yes.
Sorry, am I jumping the gun?
No, that's exactly what we're trying to do. And really looking probably more to the commissioners who were not a part of that vote at the time.
If I could just make a comment, and Becky, you're certainly aware of this, and I'm sure Renee is as well, when we had conversations with the Metro mayors. Matthews is probably one of the only towns in North Carolina that has not set aside money for some sort of attainable or affordable housing. And it's towns as small as like Blowing Rock. And of course, they have additional ways to make money because they have a lot of tourists coming in, but they've set aside lots of money. And so this is really a drop in the bucket compared to some of our similarly sized towns that somehow we're finding some money to set aside. And speaking for myself, I certainly think that I support this. I think it's a step in the right direction. And I have a lot of other comments as we go forward, but I think it sets the tone and it lets people know that we hear their concerns. Several of us, Mark, Renee, and John, were at the Christmas dinner the other night, the Historic Society. I sat with a gentleman and he asked me, "What are you doing about affordable housing?" Just a resident from town. And he was from another North Carolina town and said they had done all these things and how come we haven't done something? So it's something that's, I think, at the top of mind of a lot of people in the town, certainly our employees. It's getting really hard to live in Matthews. There's, it's becoming a very affluent and expensive place to live. And I think we need to make some efforts to get some sort of traction. Commissioner Urban.
So for purpose of discussion today, what are we using for our Matthews AMI? Is that about 80,000 plus minus?
80% or below.
No,
80%.
No,
or-
what is our baseline number that we're using to talk about the AMI? I thought it was around 79,000.
About 69, is it not?
Well, 67,850 is for family size of 3, and for family size of 4, 75,350.
So 75.3 for family of 4 in Matthews. Okay.
And I'll talk a little bit more about that. In Matthews, based on just census data, the family size is about 2.67.
Commissioner Tufano.
Good morning. Just wanted to make clear that I'm not opposed to the concept of affordable housing or to the concept of sharing the blessings that we have had as a town or individuals. What I'm a little concerned about, matter of fact, very concerned about, is discussing any type of commitment or allocation of funds in a vacuum. In other words, we're talking about only affordable housing today. But in it, there's all kinds of things happening in the town around us. There's the fire station coming online. There's the salary study that's happening. We don't even have the study back from the Urban Institute. So where my concern is that all of these things that I just discussed, plus many other things that are coming up, are all items that may become almost mandatory for us to allocate funds for out of the general fund. And this may in turn cause the necessity for a tax increase. So what I want us to be cautious about is the fact that we have this 1.5 million, which is no chump of change. It's quite a considerable amount of money, and how perhaps it could be allocated differently, or portions of it allocated differently to relieve future tax burdens. So I just like to have this, keep that in the back of our mind when we're discussing this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Garner.
So I'd like to weigh in and say that I'm supportive of this 1.5 million, because it is, even though it's a large amount of money, it is a small amount towards housing. And when Matthews received the ARPA funds, I think, unfortunately for Becky, I was reading all of the paperwork as it came out, and I was looking at what could be used and what we could go forward with since before the policy changed. And I was and have been thinking about this in terms of how do we prepare for the next emergency. One of the things businesses in Matthews are suffering from is finding employees who can afford to live on a service salary. They can't. There are large restaurant groups in Charlotte that are working on their own housing just so they can have employees. These ARPA funds are a one-time infusion of funds that will help us prepare for emergencies in the future. And so I agree that things like the fire station serve those needs. It's helpful for me to put these funds in a bucket that help us future-proof whatever the next pandemic or emergency is. Affordable housing will be one of those things so that our businesses can open up quickly and get back to having employees who can afford to live close by, who give back to the community, because they have employees who want to do that don't want to commute from Monroe or Gastonia. And these funds meet all of those needs in my mind. So just weighing in, I'm more than happy to move forward with contributing towards that one singular problem with this $1.5 million.
Can I ask those commissioners that haven't weighed in to state their opinion on the matter? Commissioner Urban.
Okay. So I still want to be clear that on the ARPA fund side, we know that we can't be, because my first reaction was take the ARPA funds and just give it back to the citizens in tax reduction. Well, that doesn't fly under the way the ARPA funds were, so to great dismay and disappointment, I think I had that conversation 2 years ago when we had this. But being in the business of doing affordable housing, I just want to make sure that we are best bang for the buck. You know, I know we have a few organizations in town that said, hey, we'd like coincidentally $1.5 million. That might build 3 homes and satisfy 12 people. Whereas there's other opportunities to invest in land or get private development or something like that. It could be so I want to be careful about that. I mean, I would rather put $10,000 into, you know, 100 homes or something like that of elderly that can allow them to stay in their homes than just build 3 houses. So I think we need to sort of, what are the projects? What are the type of terms? Personally, and I know there are some commissioners that feel otherwise, I don't think we should be in the business of putting away money every year for affordable housing. For the fact is that we are in a target-rich environment called Mecklenburg County. They have Dream Key Partners. They have a $70 million plus fund. So I think it's partnering with them, land, things of that nature, conversations. We're really at a benefit in the fact that they have the systems, the policies, the programs already established. Let's learn and partner with them and basically get underneath their wing from that standpoint. To turn around and create a development affordable housing component in the town of Matthews is hiring a staff member. So now you're talking potentially a 6-figure staff member and then seed money to do. So next, you know, you're spending money for that you could be saving to put into other things from that aspect of it. So I'm, you know, I think the 1.5 million is it's just a number pulled out of air, obviously from that standpoint, but I'm not opposed to trying it. I think we need to explore all the options. I'm very excited to see what the Urban Land Institute comes up with, what my team comes up with in this thing. But I think having focused on this, I know of single family home developers that can do affordable, but you have to have the policies in place. And maybe that's the whole thing is this town has never really, we didn't even have a tree ordinance until 10 years ago. So it's the policies and standards in place that invite those folks to want to do these things. And I think some of the nice steps are is, hey, can you give us 5 or 10% of your apartment project to 80% AMI? Well, that's chipping away at it. There's no doubt about that, but it's probably going to be woefully short of, you know, the 300 or 400 units we need on the ground today. So that's my opinion.
I did, when I was writing down some notes, I wrote down one of the points that Commissioner Urban made, which is the one point you just made. How can we stretch this money, get the biggest bang for our buck? I have another idea that I want to talk about that I first heard from Commissioner Tofano, and you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but I'll mention that in a moment. But you had a comment, Mark?
Thank you. I just wanted to make clear that I'm not suggesting giving the funds back to the taxpayer. What I am, no, that wasn't even on my thought. The part of the ARPA funds, again, talked about consensus for was to spend some of the money toward the fire station number 3. The project right now is the construction part of it is running around $4 to $6 million, somewhere in that area. But that's just the construction part. In other words, there's to turn the key is going to get us up to the $10–11 million range. You're shaking your head, but it's going to be substantially larger than the construction cost. So what the point I'm trying to make is that we have so much to spend the money on to that would, if we don't, that perhaps in the future may have to be warranting a tax increase in order to finish these projects. So again, I'm not saying take any money from here and put it to there. What I'm saying is that there are the possibility that we need to think of this thing not in a vacuum, but in a total, get the total picture of what's happening in the town as far as our expenditure and our needs.
Just to make a comment to respond to that, I've been an elected official for 10 years, and I think we've done that for the last 10 years. We just keep kicking this can down the road. We don't have the money to do it. We're not going to allocate any funds to it. Just like we haven't sufficiently, I think, taken care of our roads to the extent we need to. So I think this is something important that we have to start somewhere. Commissioner Garner.
Sure that people are watching at home. And so I don't want to kill a joke, but I do think it's important to clarify so that anybody listening, the Urban Institute is not John Urban's business, but also that, these projections of cost that we're talking about with the fire station, the town has charts and graphs and other implements of visual understanding of what the fire station is going to cost and what the ongoing cost will be. And so to put it out there that it's looking at $10+ million, I think is misleading to people not in this room. And I want to make sure that we are clear as we're talking about this, that we haven't seen that projection yet. And to reiterate that Urban Institute is not Mr. Urban's design firm.
Yeah. Commissioner Tufano.
It's not misleading. We don't even know the construction cost of the building yet. So in other words, let's not nail any figures down. I base my conversation on when I had a meeting with the chief of the fire department along with Hazen Blodgett at the time. And we whiteboarded the projected costs of what fire station number 3 is. And this is what I'm basing my numbers on. Those numbers may have changed, but those are the numbers by which I base my comments.
Commissioner Whitley, you have any comments on this, sir?
Yeah, I'm in favor of the 1.5 that's been earmarked. I certainly that's been way back in 2021 in June when we earmarked that. And certainly I think that's a start. I concur and agree with you, Mayor. Town of Matthews have been way behind, and I know other towns have set aside money for affordable homes. And I certainly want the town of Matthews to be a part of affordable homes. That's the hottest thing around the country. It is the #1 thing that people are looking for now. And certainly I don't want the town that I've served be left out, and being able to help people that can't afford the high price of housing here. And I've said it once and I said it again. Matthews is a rich town. Whenever you say the average home is $400-some thousand. Now, that's steep. And the average working person, town of Matthews, the fire, police, nurses, they cannot afford that. And certainly we have to be conscious as a board, but I'm very much satisfied as a starting point with 1.5. Thank you.
Commissioner Hoover.
Okay, I have a couple of concerns here. First, I understand the need for affordable housing. I'm not against it. Don't have a problem with the amount that's been earmarked, but I do have concerns, as Commissioner Tufano said, with Fire Station 3. I have here from our fire chief, Rob Kennenberg. They're looking at 4.5 to 6.5 million just to build a facility. So with that, and then when you get into some more cost, that just some numbers he gave me, the operating costs are projected to be 150 to 300,000 annually, but that begins in 25 fiscal year. And then you got your salaries, and there's some other things he went into. So I do have concerns with that money. For me, this is going to be a big expense. So I got a lot of concerns with Fire Station 3. Now, to go back in time, back to when this was first done, I'm a little confused when I was reading the minutes. This was done to help people who have experienced financial setbacks due to COVID-19. And I'm not understanding how the affordable housing is going to help those in the town that were affected. I mean, when you read the notes, I'm just a little confused with that, what you guys were meaning then, because the working class families that have been hurt, they won't receive any of this help. I mean, from reading this the way I'm getting it. And then lastly, it was Commissioner Urban had noted there were builders who can build affordable housing. If you check out Founders Point, which is in Monroe by Pulte, they actually have one in development now, and it's starting at the upper 200s. So something like that, maybe we can, check into. So
Becky, can you address the lifting of the restrictions on how we can spend this money?
Sure. So to revisit a complicated history. So when the preliminary rules came out related to ARPA and how they could be spent, there was a designation within that identified that affordable housing was a viable opportunity to spend the funds with a lot of hoops to jump through. And so we kind of started down that path, understanding that we would need to be able to produce a lot of documentation to be able to satisfy the federal requirements related to expending the funds in this way. A lot of that was what precipitated the board's move to have the Urban Institute complete the housing study to be able to demonstrate that justification within the community. There's other benefits to that study and being able to provide some policy guidance and true understanding of the justification of need within the community that we think is beneficial regardless. So that was a great thing to move forward with. As the federal government received feedback during their time period where they were taking what they wanted to issue as final rule under consideration, they ended up making a lot of changes to the entire ARPA program. And so the biggest change was that instead of needing to justify kind of every penny through the hoops that they required, they allowed up to $10 million to be recorded on their books as a standard revenue loss calculation. And so by opting to do that, and the board took action to do that, it allowed us to take up to 10 million of the 10.5 and tell the federal government, we're taking your standard revenue loss option. And so it allowed us to then take those funds and supplant them into our general fund. And so on the federal government's side of things, we have recorded the use of those funds as salaries and benefits for eligible positions. And so all of the recording and accounting at the federal level has been completed for those dollars. It allowed us to bring them into our general fund and essentially cut all of the restrictions and requirements and hoops that we were going to need to follow for federal purposes, and it turned them into general fund dollars. So that freed up those dollars to be able to then use for any purpose that we can use general fund dollars for. So under the old policy or the preliminary rules with the government, if those had held, we would have had to follow all of the federal guidelines as well as any state restrictions. We would have needed to have complied with both, and they're different. By cutting all of the federal regs out, we just have to follow state law for these funds. So they are sitting in the general fund as the same way that any of our other dollars are sitting in the general fund. We are tracking them separately. We are accounting for them separately so that we can be very clear with our community. This is how we spent the 10.5. We just don't have to report that differently back to the federal government. So we'll still be able to say it's 1.5 for affordable housing, it's building the fire station, it's doing whatever this board ultimately decides to do with those dollars, so long as it meets state statute for spending the funds, we are free and clear to spend them however we want.
If I can make one more comment as well, and I don't want to, well, I'll remember what my mindset was when we voted on this, and others can chime in that were on the board then if you wish, but it was our thought, Commissioner Hoover, that that COVID-19 disproportionately affected people that had like service jobs. A mechanic can't work from home, a teacher can't work from home, or maybe they can, that's a bad example, but a nurse, or you know what I'm saying. So we felt that we fell within that initial guideline because a lot of us that had more white collar jobs could just go turn our computer on and do a Zoom call and continue getting paid, where a lot of others didn't get paid during that time and grossly suffered during COVID more than others. So I want to ask Malia, do you have more to present, or are we just?
Yes.
Oh, there's so much more. So I have, again, I want to revisit something that Commissioner Fano brought up a while ago, not in this meeting, but earlier. And I'll just go ahead and mention it. Mark, I think I first heard this idea from you, I believe, but you and I were discussing one time the possibility of using some of these affordable funds as stipends to town employees, police and fire to make, do you recall that? Sure, go ahead.
It didn't come to fruition, but what I did was took the initiative to get a team together of a mortgage company, which was Movement Mortgage at the time, along with representatives from the real estate industry and also closing attorneys. And we sat down and kind of brainstormed the idea of finding some way to use mortgages or manipulate mortgages for two purposes, not only to help the town employees, but also to keep them on the job for longer than 5 years. In others, especially the police and fire. The reason Movement Mortgage was chosen is because they have their own bank, which gives them a certain flexibility. Anytime you go through a mortgage company, a standard mortgage company, the mortgages are automatically sold off to Freddie Mac or Freddie Mae or Fannie Mae. And they have really strict restrictions on how you can manipulate a mortgage. But the fact that they had their own bank was interesting to me. So where they could, and by the way, they're an altruistic mortgage company is the reason why I picked them. So the point I'm trying to make is that by working with the commercial industry and coming up with ways to creatively keep our employees here and to help them during the initial period of their mortgage was very interesting to me. And to help for them to lower their financial interest rates, or perhaps have some kind of a progressive tax rate as time goes on over the mortgage. But part of that was actually perhaps incentivizing the fire and police with some type of incentives to, in addition to the mortgage assistance, to stay here. Because one of the common themes that I'm hearing from police and fire is that we have a retention rate, very high turnover rate. So all that combined was trying to reach out to the private industry as well, and to work in partnership with them in order to help keep our employees here.
Thank you. So I didn't go down the road of being that formal with working with a specific finance company, but I was talking about the possibility of just, and again, I believe when we discussed this briefly with Mr. Buckley, but the idea was that we could give a stipend, a monetary stipend to our fire and police. And the reason Mr. Buckley was involved is, could we tie that to, we're going to give this to you as long as you stay here for X length of time. I don't know if that's legal, if we can do that or not, but just, and this probably may not even come out of this fund. This may be something that we do ongoing in effort for affordable housing, but we would essentially help those folks that have the lower salaries afford to live preferably here. I think there's a great benefit to having our police and fire live in Matthews. Commissioner Urban.
Can I get clarification? Because I found out something I didn't realize, and maybe it's not statewide, but my now son-in-law, he is a state employee. He teaches for the school system. He did not have to put a down payment on his home. This as an employee of the state, they wave the magic wand or whatever. So I think that's a pretty nice little lift that the rest of us were 10-20% into it.
Well, it's possible that he got his mortgage through SECU. And so LGFCU is the sister bank. They're co-located. And so they do have mortgage programs that do not require a down payment. So it's possible that was where he got his mortgage through.
I guess that's the point. Is it, are there, for fire and police and things like that, I think there's already some good opportunities that we're not seeing. And if that's available, that's a big heck of a start.
Yeah. And just to keep us organized, there is as Malia is going through the options, one of them does start to list kind of some of this, maybe some programming for employees. So if we want to maybe pause before we go too far down this rabbit hole, we can keep moving. And then when that comes up this morning, we can discuss it further.
Mr. Whitley, quick comment.
Yeah, and John, I serve on the State Employees Credit Union Board, and there is 100% financing first home buyers. If you are a member of the credit union or somebody in your family is a member of credit union, I think that's amazing, because I got a little granddaughter that's 26, and she's trying to get into her first home, and it's good to know that being a member of the credit union, and this is just, but you being a member, you automatically for a first time homeowner don't have to pay no down, 100% financing.
Commissioner Stefano.
Yeah, just a very quick closing comment, but that all this reiterates the point that there's all kinds of possibilities of working with the private sector in order to really, and going back to Commissioner Urban's comment about stretching these dollars, there's that possibility. So thank you.
All right, let's let Malia continue, or we're not gonna, she won't be able to finish today. So.
Well, this is great conversation. And I want to say that a lot of things that you all hit on, we'll talk a little more in detail as we explore some of the different pathways. So Becky shared the history of the 1.5. As she mentioned, we now can use those dollars based on North Carolina general state statutes, and wanted to give you a little more information and detail around what those statutes share around what we can do in the space of affordable housing initiatives. So under North Carolina Statute 160, we are able to participate in community development program activities, but principally for the benefit of low and moderate income persons. So again, when you think of that low and moderate income person, those are people who are 80% or below area median income. The moderate is the 80, the low is about 60 and below. Most of those community development programs, really all of them are federal programs. And so I want to just clarify that these are not programs that we develop from a grassroots effort, but these are federal programs, community block grants, home federal programs, some of the many programs that you've probably heard from other municipalities. We're also able to acquire property and lease land, and I'll go into a little detail around each one of these. We're able to construct and rehabilitate residential housing for sale or rental. So as you all mentioned earlier, that partnership with public entities or private developers. The third bullet really, that's really what that is sharing, that we could partner with these entities in order to construct or rehab residential housing for the purpose of for the purpose to benefit low and moderate income persons. We're also able to convey property by private sale to any public-private nonprofit or entity of affordable housing, and then also convey residential property by private sale to low and moderate income persons. One of the things that I want us to just make sure that we remember as part of this conversation is that there's a lot of different language in these statutes. And one of the statutes, if you see the note at the bottom, is the statute pertaining to housing authorities. So local government is able to act as a housing authority, but there's a lot of rules and regulations that come with that. So it may sound easy, but it can be very complex. So just wanted to share as we're thinking about these different options or opportunities for using these funds, there are a lot of different factors to take into consideration. I think we've talked a little bit about this, and I feel like we're all in a good place, but for purposes of the meeting and for folks that might be listening online, I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about what is affordable housing. I think, we know that people, when they think about it, there's a lot of different emotions and feelings that come into it. But as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't discriminate. The faces look very different. The incomes look very different. So when we think about affordable housing, the first definition is housing ownership or rentals for individuals and families, those low to moderate income, who earn 80% or less of the area median income. And specifically for Charlotte, when you think about that 80% AMI, I've listed here what those dollars are based on the number of people in a household. So for a household of one person, that's around $52,750. For a household of two people, that's $60,300. 3 people, $67,850. And then for a household of 4 members, that is $75,350. And this is as of June 2021, I believe. Actually, it's effective June 15th, 2022. As I mentioned for Matthews, when we look at kind of census data, what we're seeing is that Matthews on average has a household of 2.67 persons per household here in Matthews.
Malia, are we using Charlotte's numbers for Matthews as far as AMI? Or is there a separate number?
We fall within the same category. It's for Mecklenburg County.
Okay, thank you.
The other,
Commissioner Fano?
yes.
Do we, this may be a question for Jay or for the staff in general. Do we keep the metric of how many units have been dedicated to 80% AMI by the developers as we're going through the rezoning process? If we don't, I think that's an important metric for us to follow.
So none have been delivered yet. Obviously, that's something we've just started doing in the past 12 to 18 months, but it's relatively simple. It's something that we can track in terms of where they're located and what the commitment was, whether it was for 10 or 15 years. Because I think we've got 5 that are for sale deed restricted at the project over by Butler High School. And then we've got, I think, 2 or 3 multifamily communities. So yeah, we'll be keeping track of that. Thank you.
Yes,
It's a very small number.
Well,
Very small.
regardless,
Yeah, I agree.
regardless, yeah,
Good
we
point.
need to know how many of those units are in play because that comes into the calculation of what we need to do with this money. All
Absolutely.
right, thank you.
Commissioner Garner?
I have a question, I guess, for Jay about this. Maybe, I don't know who it goes to, but when somebody agrees to an 80% AMI percentage of housing, is it for the year that they agreed or for the year that the construction is open for occupancy? We've never specified. And
So the way those programs work, somebody has to qualify when they go into the unit, and then they need to re-qualify every year. So that number is going to shift presumably up a little bit every year, but it would apply to the year that the person is actually moving into the home. It doesn't date back to when they agreed to participate in the program, like when the developer agreed to it.
I think in the future, I need some more clarification on that because of agreements with developers and not having a lot of ability to follow up on that. So when they're crunching numbers, they say, yes, that unit I can lease for, whatever, $1,500 a month. And that's 80% AMI. I don't know if they're relying on that, but looking at these numbers in 2021, my household was 80% AMI. We are now 70% AMI. So, and our income hasn't changed. So knowing that the percentage changes, and also knowing how maybe squishy the terms are when we make agreements with developers, I'd like to have something a little more formalized to know that, so that also Jay can keep track of those numbers in the future.
All right, good points. I will let Malia continue. I do want to mention, though, that a concern I have is all of these agreements are time restricted. And so some board down the road is going to say, oh, shoot, all of our affordable housing is gone because the limits went up. And we've had people come in here. One of the developers came in here and was going to offer for 5 years. I mean, that's just useless. I mean, 5 years is a blink, and then there won't be, those units are no longer affordable. So that's a concern I have. But Malia, please continue. We'll try to shut up so you can finish.
No, great conversation. So the second definition, again, to be mindful of is that affordable housing, when we think about it, when we're talking about it industry wide, is housing costs that equate to less than 30%. So anybody's household who is paying less than 30% toward their housing costs are considered to be able to afford housings. But if you're paying more than that 30%, then you're falling in the need to have affordable housing. So there's 4 pathways that I'd like to talk about in detail. Some of you all mentioned it today. It really aligns to what we are able to do financially with affordable, with dollars as we think about affordable housing activities. So the first pathway is to participate in community development programs and activities to support critical emergency repair services for residential properties. As I mentioned, a lot of the community development programs are federally funded programs where the federal government is working with a state entity. And for us, it's the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency that is kind of like the holder of funds that come through the federal government, and then they allocate it to the local municipalities and towns. The benefit of participating in a program to support critical repair and emergency services are, one, it supports restoration and preservation of older neighborhoods and properties. A lot of the residents that I've at least spoken to or hear when they come to the different board meetings, they've been living here for 15 plus years. So we do have a more established older community. Also, when we think about that, it really promotes aging in place for those that are here, come here and want to retire here, as well as staying in place. As you mentioned, the housing market sales prices are increasing. So for someone who has come here 15 years ago, the house is their house was very affordable, but now if they come here and try to buy that same house, it's almost 50% more. So it promotes that aging in place and staying in place for current Matthew residents. And one thing that I think is beneficial to know, and I think Commissioner Urban, you spoke about it earlier when you said us to think about 3 single family homes, or are you helping maybe a larger group of people? So with the critical and emergency home repairs, it allows a larger number of Matthew residents to be helped, particularly those that are in special populations with like the disabled individuals or elderly individuals. With this program, or kind of with this pathway, there are some things to take into consideration. As I mentioned earlier, some of our larger municipalities like the city of Charlotte or Mecklenburg County, they have a division of folks. They have a large group of people that are dedicated, that is their day job in and out to administer programs around housing services. So one thing that we would need to take into consideration is if this would be a town administered initiative, or if there's opportunity to partner with existing providers. So we do have providers in the area who are already providing a service like Greater Matthews Habitat for Humanity, where we might partner with them to allow them to extend that service beyond what their current utilization. If there is the desire to partner, then one of the things that we'd like to take into consideration is to be able to establish a process, a vendor selection, oversight, and compliance process. And we'll talk a little more about that, but it really just allows us to make sure that we are being equitable to partners who might want to partner with us to use use these funds for these services versus maybe dedicating it to one vendor and you have a vendor to come at a later date? How do you decide who gets what allocation? So some type of formal process for that would be helpful and beneficial for us as we think about that program. And then the commitment to providing ongoing funding. So we had the 1.5, that's a pretty substantial amount, but this would be something that we would want to consider possibly, or that you might want to consider over time if there's an annual allocation to continue to fund this program on a year-to-year basis.
Commissioner Urban.
Let me, not quite thinking out of the box, but when a property goes into historic designation, there's tax abatement. Is this have to go to Raleigh to sit there and say, we have a program here for elderly, and if they're making certain improvements to their property, I mean, I'm assuming we just don't have carte blanche at this stage in the game to wave the magic wand on the tax abatement aspect of it.
So we don't have the ability to do tax abatement, but we do have the ability in state statute to fund a program like this, because you would be ensuring that the recipients of these critical home repair funds fall within the 80% AMI or below designations. And so they qualify where we would be able to utilize town funds to replace their roof, replace their air conditioner. We wouldn't be able to do anything on the tax abatement side. Now, the county does have the tax abatement programs for certain income thresholds that they would potentially qualify for. We wouldn't be able to do anything additional on the tax abatement, but we could allow the critical components of their home to be kept up in such a way that it would allow them to stay in place and be in a usable home, presumably if they either have a very tiny mortgage or perhaps their house is paid off. That is at the end of the day likely going to be the cheapest housing option they would ever be able to find. And so being able to stay in their home, this would support that for existing Matthews residents.
Commissioner Tofano.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment for the listening public. The 1.5 million, this is addressing the last comment, commitment to providing ongoing funding. The 1.5 million right now represents 10% of the ad valorem taxes. We're running at a pretty close to $15 million ad valorem. Okay, so just to make sure we don't have that in our heads, that going on, it'd be like a $1.5 million per year ongoing funding. It would be substantially less than that. What that number might be, I don't know, but this represents, as I say, 10% of our ad valorem taxes. So to increase this type of commitment year after year would be a major burden on the taxpayer. So thank you.
Just want to clarify on that. I think the intention, certainly if this board wanted to put all 1.5 towards critical home repair, that would be the board's prerogative. In the discussions that Malia and I have had with Habitat for Humanity that is currently administering a program like this, they run out of funding just a few months into their calendar year. And so there's definitely a need for this program. But if, say, this board opted to put all 1.5 million, we would expect that to last multiple years before they would be looking to need additional funding. And then ongoing funding to support a program like this would really be the prerogative of this board. You could put $100,000, into the community program, up to whatever you wanted, but there's no suggestion that there would be an ongoing annual commitment of 1.5 or anything close to it.
Exactly. That's the reason
Yes.
I brought up the conversation. Yes. I wanted to make sure it was clear to the public. All right, thanks.
I really like this being at least a portion of how we allocate these funding because I, like probably many of you, have heard the stories. Here in Matthews, I heard of an elderly lady that was charged $10,000 to replace her water heater. It was a $250 water heater that a national plumbing chain decided to charge her $10,000 because they could. And she was crying and very upset and was probably going to lose her home because of this bill. So if we can prevent that from happening from some folks, that would be great. And I hear these stories all the time. There's unfortunately a lot of unscrupulous contractors that will prey on elderly people that and way overcharge for things. And this would allow people to stay in their least expensive housing option.
And not to go too far down the rabbit trail of needing to partner with Habitat for Humanity, but we did have conversations with them to understand their existing program. And just as an example, they have established contractors that they work with. They pay the contractor directly. They vet the applicants to make sure that they qualify and do all of the paperwork. And so to your point, Mayor, it appeared to be some good assurances that these were fair prices that they were being charged, then there was just a pass through to get the dollars directly to the vendor, and the person was then able to have that improvement in their home without any cost to them.
Another example is the wheelchair ramp. I've seen people having to leave their home because they couldn't afford to have a wheelchair ramp built that they needed to get inside their home. So, Malia, please continue.
So Mayor, thank you. I'm glad that you mentioned the wheelchair ramp, because that critical repair services is for accessible needs. So a wheelchair ramp or something for someone who might be disabled.
Mr. Farnham.
Having built many wheelchair ramps as part of a men's group for a major church here in Charlotte, this is another opportunity for us to not only partner with private entities, but also with the faith organizations. There's a number of large churches that have men's groups that are more than willing to go out and do this type of thing. I personally have been part of building over probably 8 or 9 handicap ramps. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be totally on the burden. The point I'm bringing this up is that there's so many ways to help the people that need help in this town, and to take it upon the total responsibility of the town to do so is, I think, not a good resource of use of our resources. So there's partnerships that can be made both with the faith and the private community. Thank you.
Thank you. So a second potential pathway, again, as we think about the community development programs, is to offer financial assistance programs for home buyers. And these programs, again, are federal program dollars that would pass through. There would be different criteria that the home buyer would have to meet. The benefits to this particular pathway are, one, it supports the workforce housing individuals and families that are 80% or below AMI. When I mention or when I state workforce housing, those are the folks like the teachers, the nursing aides, police officers, firefighters. This program could specifically support eligible Matthew employees too. So as you all were talking earlier about what programs might be out there to assist current Matthew employees, this would be a particular program where the employee would work with a community partner agency that's designated by the state, and they may go through some home buyer counseling classes. There's different criteria that they might have to meet just based on that program, and in return may be eligible for receiving some type of financial down payment toward a home. So this is that type of program when we mention that you all maybe had talked about earlier that would benefit eligible Matthew employees. One of the things, or some of the things to consider as we think about this program or think about this pathway, is that Matthews, we currently do not have sufficient inventory of moderately priced housing to support the buying effort. So as we heard a couple of weeks ago from Mecklenburg County doing their reevaluation presentation, in Mecklenburg, the median sales price is for a home is $450,000. In Matthews, it's about $415,000 to $430,000. One thing with this type of program, a lot of those programs have limits to them, which speaks to the second bullet. So for example, there's a federal program called HOME where individuals are able to receive down payment assistance for purchasing a home. However, with that particular program, the sales price limit is $284,000. So
Excuse me, Jay, how many homes do we have in Matthews that you can buy for 284,000? I mean, I know you don't have that in the top of, but it's probably a handful, if any, correct? I heard that our last Habitat house sold for $250,000.
It's a really rare price point. If you do find a home at that price, it probably needs substantial rehab. It could need another, 80 to 100,000 in repairs if you find one at that price.
So thank you. So just to reiterate, a lot of the programs do have sales price limits, which again would maybe have us consider a look to some partnerships that I'll talk about later with private entities. Potential pathway number 3, acquire property so this is the town to acquire property and or lease land for affordable housing. So some of those benefits with this pathway is that it maintains public ownership, and that public ownership, just to clarify, is only with the land lease. So if we have the property and we lease it to an entity for them to develop that affordable housing, it stays once that entity removes itself from that property, it returns to us as we have that ownership. It allows for more direct oversight and engagement of development activities. So because we own the land or we're leasing that, we are able to better influence the conversations about what types of affordable housing options might be used for that particular parcel. And in that also it expands housing options to accommodate various home buyer needs. So, it might be a single family, a multifamily, there's different home options that we may be able to further visit on what we think might be best used for that particular parcel. Some of the considerations there is the potential limited return on investment. When you think about the purchasing of land and how much land are you going to purchase with, thinking about the 1.5 and how much land can you purchase? And in that, how many units can you build? It almost becomes cost prohibitive. How far does that dollar stretch to really move the needle as you might want to as a board? It also positions the town as kind of the lead in determining where affordable housing is. So we know when we talk about or mention affordable housing in the community, there's a lot of different emotions. And so by this option, it really positions you as a board to be that leader and step out front to advocate for affordable housing and understanding some of the implications that or some of the difficult conversations or challenges that might present with itself, as well as opportunities. And then when we think about purchasing or acquiring that land, the town's involvement in the land acquisition, it may influence the prices to go up. So again, 1.5 is pretty sufficient, a pretty substantial amount of money. But when we think about that purchasing of land, how much land are we really able to purchase with that?
So, but before we move on, I think we're looking for perhaps some board input on, is this an area that you want us to pursue, at least, continue to pursue, or is it an area that, kind of based on benefits and considerations, is it maybe one that goes on the back burner, or you say, it's just maybe not where we want to put our focus at this time?
I would say the latter. It doesn't seem like it's a good use of the funds. Commissioner Tefano?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if that question was based for pathway number 3. Is that what your question was directed to?
Yes.
Okay, I agree. Thank you.
Commissioner Hoover?
Same, like, we don't
That's
need
it.
to get involved with
No.
the town now.
Yeah, I know Commissioner Urban's made similar comments. Others agree.
Okay, I'm seeing at least 4.
Doesn't seem like
Okay.
this would extend our funding to the maximum amount for sure. It'd be very limited. To Commissioner Urban's point, maybe we could help a couple families, and that's not what we want to do.
Thank you.
And then that brings us to potential pathway number 4, which I think this is where we generated a lot of conversations in the beginning of the meeting. So that pathway is to construct and or rehabilitate residential housing for sale or rental of affordable housing. And this is really talking about partnering with private and public entities to advance opportunities to create affordable housing here in Matthews. Some of the benefits there is it expands housing options to accommodate different needs. As I was doing some research in affordable housing and what other municipalities are doing, one in Raleigh, they were recently recognized by the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency as a model for affordable housing with their East College Park community. And so this community is a makeup of 98 single-family homes, 51 townhomes, and there is a 60-40 split. So 60% of those units are income restricted, 60% or below the area median income, and then 40% of those units are they do not have any income restrictions. So anyone can purchase in that community. But there is a restriction for how long they have to hold a deed, which I think is about 10 years. So this is a good example of how a municipality can partner with a private developer to create options that would be both for those in the affordable housing who have affordable housing needs, as well as to allow those that may not have the opportunity to live in that community as well. This also supports closing the funding gap for developers using low-income tax credits. I know we've heard some conversations around low-income tax credits. I won't go into the details about how that works, but really when you think about low-income tax credits, the takeaway that I asked that you think about there is those are for developers. And so developers are able to request or apply to receive those credits, and in turn are able to provide programs to first-time home buyers as well as renters. And that's where you, when you think about subsidies, they're able to provide some type of subsidy to that individual, which speaks to that third bullet. It supports workforce housing programs such as down payment assistance or rental subsidies, which are offered through the developer. So it has a lot of moving pieces and a lot of benefits, this model, with the municipality supporting it by providing a portion of funds to close any funding gaps for that opportunity. Some things that we would like for you to take into consideration as you think about this pathway. It requires us to have some established policies and processes to govern that partnership. So for example, if an entity has agreed to 20% of their units being 80% or below the area median income, then there should be processes in place where we can validate, or where there's some validation around, are those units being used specifically for that purpose, as well as different policies associated with affordable housing and land and development, which that brings me to bullet number 2, necessitating just additional staff resources to really serve as a liaison. So working with the developer, working with the agency, working with the community as we develop this affordable housing model within our community.
Mr. Tufano?
I'm going to call upon the combined recollection of the existing staff and board members. Has it ever been brought up to Charles, our town attorney, about the possibility of property tax abatements in order to help in that respect? And go ahead.
North Carolina does not allow property tax abatement.
Okay.
Commissioner Garner?
If this were something that we were interested in going down the path on, is that something we could partner with the county and allow county staff that's already involved in this sector to take over?
It's interesting that you ask that, because as Malia was talking, that exact thought came to mind. So we have had some conversations as we've tried to start to educate ourselves in this field with the county's staff person who handles this. And one thing that we kind of heard over and over and over from her was that the county is the last funding partner. So basically the developer does all of their math, they get all of their tax credits, they push and pull on every funding source that they have. And then they go to the county, with basically saying, we need $500,000 or we need $1 million to be able to make all of the numbers flesh out to be able to move forward with this affordable housing project. And that's when the county steps in and potentially provides that last step to get them over that finish line to be able to move forward with their project. And so this, I think the concept here is that we would be looking to play a similar role. I think you're exactly right. I think that would certainly warrant some conversations with the county if it was something that our funding, just talking out loud here, if our funding could go to them and be designated that it would be for projects in Matthews, that could be a way to maybe bypass some of the needed staff resources at the town level. Obviously, we would still want to put a lot of focus into making sure that the policies of how the funds would be utilized were in place and supported by this board, that the county would be able to follow to make sure that we felt good about how the funds were being managed, but no need to reinvent the wheel if it's existing already. So again, looking for feedback from the group as far as interest in continuing to pursue this. Obviously, there's a lot more work that has to go into this related to policy development, but is this an area, I guess, from an ROI standpoint that the board is interested in keeping on the table?
Mr. Willie?
Yeah, I think this is a good potential pathway, this section 4. I see a lot of different energies that could be utilized, certainly partner with Mecklenburg County through this resource.
See others nodding their heads. So I think we have some consensus there. Commissioner Urban?
I mean, I keep it on the table for now, but I want to flush it out because you're absolutely right. Is developers put all the Bean County together and they ask for the gap. And right now, interestingly enough, as interest rates are climbing, our LIHTC developers are panicking because it's really making that gap stretch out and becoming problematic. But do you have more pathways than these 4? Or these the 4 primary ones?
These are the 4 primary.
Okay. All right.
And we can explore others if you have some.
Well, no,
interest.
I see. I'm always like pulling from different buckets, and
Okay.
I think one of the conversations has to be is I think I mentioned this to Jay before. We have a limited amount of vacant land available, so you can actually model out if you build out. If you say, well, we build out all single family homes, we build out all duplexes, we build out all apartments, we can figure that out. And the next step is infill. We're going back and tearing down and rebuilding. So in some respects, you can create a policy for new construction, whether it's single family home, residential, or townhomes or apartments, and you can create a policy for that and pencil in and say, well, we can only build another 8,000 units of apartments in the next decade. So we can get 5% of that. So we've got 400 units of affordable housing. So you can finite certain things at this stage in the game. So I think that's one bucket and one area you can talk to is create policy that says in a new single family home subdivision, you need to do X. In a new apartment subdivision, you do Y. And that's just the rule of the road. And then what you do is the other bucket is the policies for the old. It's sort of like you have a single lot home. It needs refurbishing. You have some policy statements that say you could build a secondary structure, an accessory structure on that property to generate more income or house additional people. So I think there are a series of things we could do very quickly, low hanging fruit. And then you start tackling the bigger issues of what are those projects of workforce housing, work with private individuals. More than happy to, you've got contacts already at Dream Key. I'm sure you've talked to Liz Ward, some of my clients. Some of that stuff is way up here. It probably bores us to death, about 4%, 9% bonds, the whole 9 yards. There's so much on the private side. If the policies are such that it's inviting for them, they will entertain it. Now, the one thing we don't have is the census tract pieces on the LIHTC side, because you've got to check the box. You're near a grocery store, check. You're within X, check. You're within Y, check. LIHTC is low income housing tax credits. LIHTC is the lowest affordable housing product, so to speak, from that standpoint. Well, one thing I do want to stay away from, and I think we could create a hybrid for, is unfortunately, affordable housing is an 800-pound gorilla that creates undue expense because of the bureaucracy involved. And I think if you could bypass that and work with private developers and open up things, you could save money to put back into programs. Because the only people that make the money on the deal is the developer and the bureaucracy. And then next thing you know, we're building things, and Larry knows this, the cost of building affordable housing by the book is usually twice as much as market rate. So if that's the case, I could build twice as much market rate and policy it as affordable than dealing with it. And another thing I'll throw it out there is every state has a QAP, which is a qualified allocation plan. Every state puts rules onto what this affordable housing should have. Well, in North Carolina, a thing that says your minimum master bedroom size will be 12 by 12. Well, in South Carolina, it's like 12 by 17. Well, I can't make things affordable if you keep telling me to make monster rooms and I have to have 3 bathrooms and I have to do this and I got to gold plate that. So that's why I think anything we can do to privatize and stay in that thing helps us, because when we get into the system, it hurts us. That's my 2 cents, having been in the business.
All right, Malia,
Can we go back to pathway number 2 and just get some feedback on that? We didn't take the temperature of the room before we moved on. So this one, if you look at the federal program models, there's not good housing inventory in Matthews that fits those models. I think the takeaway from that is if we were to be trying to provide down payment assistance or something like that, we may be needing to put significant dollars into those assistance programs due to the price points of homes in Matthews. So certainly if that's the prerogative of the board, we can continue to keep this on the table, but wanted to, I guess, understand where the board was at in, do you want to at least keep this one on the table? We can do some more research, or do we put it to the side for now?
So as I mentioned, I mean, I think the number of occupiable $284,000 single family residences in Matthews is probably extremely limited. So it doesn't seem like this in this form is with the federal programs, for instance, this one in particular is viable. However, I would like to, one of the main things I would like to see us do with this $1.5 million is have some sort of stipend. And particularly the second bullet under benefits, I would like to see it target Matthews employees. I'd like to see more of our employees live in Matthews. And again, I think there's a lot of benefit to that, and maybe expand it to others as well, but certainly target our employees as a benefit that would keep people wanting to work for our town and stay here for a long time. Jay, do you have a comment?
I did. So you have to keep in mind that our geography is really small. We have 17 square miles. There are, I don't know if we have 5,000 or 6,000 housing units that are maybe for sale. That's just rounding, but we've got 2.5 million people that live in the Charlotte region. So targeting a program that would require you to live in our city limits or town limits would be really difficult, where we know that as the further east you go, housing prices decline as you move out to Stallings, Indian Trail, Monroe. A lot of our employees commute from as far away as Anson County. I ran the numbers to your question earlier. I just went to realtor.com. We've got fewer than 24 houses under 400,000
Wow.
available. And of those, there are currently 8 homes available that you could buy today in Matthews under 400,000. And then to Commissioner Urban's comment earlier about 100% down payments, if you go to, I've been to this website, I don't know, 100 times since I worked here. I went and did the payment calculator at State Employees Credit Union, 100% zero down on a $400,000 house at 5.9% is about $2,400 a month, plus taxes and insurance. You're looking at $2,700 a month. Even if you got into this great no down payment program, you're looking at, with utilities, you're looking at $3,000 a month in housing costs. So like the program's wonderful, but you need a substantial income. So these are just, I just wanted to give some follow-ups on.
Right. And I think we need to consider, when we consider housing, we also need to consider that all housing isn't purchased. So rental is certainly more available. And if we could offer stipends to allow people to afford to make rental units more affordable, that's another option. Commissioner Tavano?
Yes, I just wanted to agree with the mayor about concentrating on our own employees. I believe Becky and Leah, correct me, please, but I think that every one of our starting fire and police are under the 80% AMI.
Absolutely. You'll be hearing more about that Monday, but absolutely.
Yeah.
Significantly so, yeah.
So I think we have, as they say, charity begins at home. And I think we have that a wonderful opportunity to do that. And this is the reason I was talking also about, and this goes into number 4, pathway number 4 as well, is to get as private cooperation as much as possible, private sector cooperation and faith-based organizations. I think putting together some kind of package for our own employees would be our primary focus. Thank you.
Let me suggest, I see a lot of very large teas and coffees and waters around the room. Can we take a 10-minute break and make sure it's 10 minutes and come back and regroup? Ken's accident was in Hendersonville, so he's at Party Hospital. Oh, he's in where? Party. Hendersonville.
Oh, wow. Better get him down the Shaw. The small mannerism of driving through is getting absolutely ridiculous. My niece's boyfriend, they were in Texas. He moved over into a different lane, didn't see a car moving about 120 miles an hour. Oh. And it pushed him off the road down in the bank that he rolled 5 or 6 times. He came out completely unscathed. But it's just this, it just seems like chaos. Super professional.
Oh my gosh.
My Lyles tells me that there's a group of people that race on 45 like every Friday and Saturday. I can hear us. You know,
I mean, it's
and they can't stop them. They just do it.
scary.
They're going 120 miles an hour on 45 and zigzagging around cars.
And all that construction on 45 and
It's amazing. More people.
yeah. See, that, I mean, every day driving that road, I'm like, okay, let me get off and get on the side street as soon as I can. I don't like driving. Mhm. Yeah, Providence, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, curbs are, yeah, kind of surround you, yeah. Yeah, because it's, I mean,
Well, but that's the deal
oh my gosh. I know, that's. I know people they're not paying attention to anything. Yeah, I mean, it's like, I'm like, what in the world? The other day I was at a stoplight sitting there and I was happened to look up in the rearview mirror and this car was coming and the girl is looking up in her rearview mirror, holding the phone. I'm like, is she gonna stop? And she just barely stopped. And I'm like, I don't like putting gas in that Tahoe, but I like having a bigger car around me to at least hopefully protect me a little bit, because it's crazy what people do. And they dart in and out and cut you off. And I'm like, where are you trying to go so fast? I mean, we're already I mean, traffic is moving at a good rate. Yeah, it's crazy.
Chatters, apparently.
We were on, guys in motorcycle, yes. All of a sudden, we came to stop.
Yeah.
And there was an accident.
Oh, yeah.
We're gonna die.
Mm.
I think that's probably.
Yeah.
I think we're just saying.
On 485.
It was a few years
Let's go ahead and get started again. Do we have everybody back? Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Garner.
That was faster than I was expecting. I just wanted to continue from that last conversation that we were having. For me personally, I think there are staffing needs that come ahead of adding a new position for affordable housing. And I want to keep that in mind as we talk about these different pathways. So anywhere where we can partner with another organization that's already really developed and mature, I think is a good idea for us. Also, one of my thoughts as we talk about this is when we were talking with the developer by Butler, the townhomes, I remember him saying he couldn't hold units for town staff members. And I don't know exactly why he said that, but if it's something on the private developer side, maybe we need to make sure, what we're doing before we get too far into this. And then also, I think to comment on, let's see which one, I think it's number 2, the pathway number 2. And if the employee credit union already has a program in place, maybe education sessions and setting up something so that employees know that that's an option would be a first step. And then taking the funds that we've dedicated here, this 1.5, and looking at what the Urban Institute comes back with makes the most sense to me.
All right, we're going to continue. I'd just like to summarize. I believe, well, I know that we have a consensus of the majority of the board to move forward with a affordable housing initiative, at least initially with $1.5 million. Concerns noted by Commissioner Tofano and Commissioner Hoover. And then secondly, I guess we need to get down to the brass tacks about how do we want to spend this money. And I have some ideas or some priorities, but I know Malia, who's done an excellent job so far, bringing all these options forward, has some information about some specific requests that we've received and like to review those.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So the next couple of slides, as the mayor mentioned, we will talk about some of the unsolicited requests that we've already received as a town as it relates to the $1.5 million earmark. So the first one is from Rainbow Express. Many of you all know Rainbow Express Ministries is a nonprofit, faith-based. They serve children and young adults with and without disabilities. They also offer program member-specific opportunities, and I've listed them here, the summer camps, young adult groups. They partner with international agencies for different mission opportunities, as well as respite care for families who have young adults with disabilities. So their specific request to the town is for the full 1.5 million investment. And this would be to build 3 to 4 affordable single family homes on their property located at Talbot Court at Fullwood Lane. And so that is the request of Rainbow Express. Our second request is from Greater Matthews Habitat for Humanity. So Greater Matthews also is a nonprofit organization that provides home ownership and critical home repair services to Matthews community. I think we mentioned that earlier, that they already have an established program. They're currently helping Matthew residents. Their request for funding is for $1 million investment to purchase land, as well as fund construction for single family homes or some type of unit, provide critical home repairs, and also provide home rehabilitation activities. And then we have our last request. This is a request from Law Street. So Law Street is a mixed income developer. They're very, they've done a lot of different projects in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg County area. But through partnerships, Law Street develops affordable housing communities for households at varying income levels. And just to reiterate, again, these would be with the focus of the 80% or below the area median income. So their request is for a $500,000 investment for the Mount Moriah Senior Community Development. And this request will be in conjunction. They currently have submitted a request for proposal through Mecklenburg County. So Mecklenburg County had a request for proposal opening for use of some ARPA funds, and they have submitted a request to Mecklenburg County for $1 million to also support this development.
Let me just make a comment. I want to remind Commissioner Whitley, you need to recuse yourself if we discuss this particular one at any. Thank you, sir.
So at this time, are there any questions about any of the three requests or further conversation that you would like to hold around these requests?
I have some thoughts. First, I think the request amounts are all very what word am I looking for? Large. So or maybe a little reaching. I do know that Habitat has done quite a bit for our community with affordable housing. And I personally would like to see us fund them in some way for the purpose of rehabilitating residential housing, maybe not necessarily building one or two houses, but doing that again, as Commissioner Tufano and others have said, partnering with somebody that's already doing it. They have a program in place that maybe we could help fund to make repairs to residential housing. I recently had the opportunity to go to my church, had a night that celebrated Rainbow Express. They had it was a fundraiser, an auction, and a dinner. And I believe probably 500 or 600 people showed up. It was a really large event. And I learned a lot more from Lori Little, the program director, who I had lunch with back many months ago, but learned more about their program. And although their letter says they want to build 3 to 4 affordable single family homes, I think their immediate need is for 2 homes. And this is kind of behind the White House on Fullwood. One thing that kind of struck me, a couple things, is the great number of adults with mental disabilities that we have in our community. There's a lot of these, a lot more people than I realized. And as these folks age with their parents who are becoming very aged, we have some of these people are in their 40s and 50s and are still living and being cared for by their parents. I think Rainbow Express is attempting to build homes where these people may actually live. And Becky and I had this conversation, how does this fit into affordable housing? Well, while they're trying to find employment of some type for these folks, generally it's very low paying. And so I just think this is a very good opportunity for us to put some portion of this money towards this, because I don't think we've necessarily been very active in supporting this particular demographic in our community, and it's a lot larger than you think. I was really surprised. There's a lot of these folks that live in Matthews or nearby Matthews that really need help, and so I think it's a good opportunity. Are there any other comments or questions about the ones that we received that were unsolicited? Commissioner Urban.
To somewhat dovetail into Habitat, I'm not an advocate of building 3 or 4 homes for $1 million. It's just not the bang for the buck. But if you wanted to have Habitat be the Good Samaritan and recreate that rehab program where we, just like we did facade grants, we create a grant program and they are our eyes and ears on managing that. They say, hey, we have 5 residences. 2 want to replace the heaters, 1 wants to insulate, blah, blah, blah. They're 70 years old. 1 needs a wheelchair ramp, that kind of thing. And we funnel the money as a grant type of situation or somehow that program's set up. I'm all for that aspect of it. I think that would do a lot of good because it keeps them aging in place. Anytime you can do something to improve the condition of your home from an efficiency standpoint, brings your utility costs down. You could then globally apply that across all of Matthews. Anybody, no matter, what their income level is, if they could justify, for that grant. Now, I don't know if it's up to $2,500, $5,000, something like that, or there's levels, but I think that puts the onus on them to do it. They have the vendors, they have the resources and the software to monitor all that kind of stuff. And it's a great partnership.
So to answer your question, that program is based on income restrictions. So again, thinking about the 80%.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Mr. Garner?
I'm not sure I'm ready to say what I support until we know what the Urban Institute comes back with. 3 to 4 homes, while it may be needed, may not be the best use of that property. And it sounds like they're purchasing it, at market rate instead of partnering with other organizations. So my first impulse is to say, maybe single family homes aren't our best in our best interest. And so we need to know exactly what Matthews needs, what it looks like before moving forward with.
If I could make one comment, the proposal from Rainbow Express is for many folks living in each home. They're not single family homes. It's a group home. There would be many people with developmental disabilities living in a home with some supervision and living on site there.
I guess then that leads me to sort of a second point is we also have to, I guess, come to a consensus as a board, how much oversight we want and what sort of presentation we want from people asking. And, once the money is donated, if it's going to Rainbow Express, is it, what contingencies or what are we putting on the developer at that point? And I don't think we haven't had that conversation. We haven't had the conversation about what we need. So none of these really sort of speak to me and say, we're ready to answer that question.
Mr. Whitley.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Rainbow too, because one of the board members that served with me on the credit union, I think she raffled off the Rainbow auction, John, at the church of the night. And I think she was sharing with me that they were starting bids at maybe $1,000. Does that sound right, John?
I'm sorry, for what?
Rainbow Ridge at the church of the night when they had the raffle. When they had 500 some people come to the church.
But what specifically you're saying what they bid?
Didn't they have a big donation?
Yes, they had they just asked people, raise your hand if you'd like to give $1,000, raise your hand if you'd like to give $5,000.
And she was sharing with me that quite a few, there was a private development. She just shared with me of the night at the Christmas party that several people donated thousands of dollars to this. Also, and I was sharing that the house that's right on the corner that has already been developed. The house belonged to Annalisa Watley, but she donated it to them. And that's a big group house. It's a beautiful home on that corner there that, I think we ought to give something to them, but I see their asses for all that we got. And, but certainly I think as you said, Mayor, I think it's an avenue that we have not really considered in disabilities and being able to meet the needs of the disability community, ensuring that we are sensitive and being a part of that. I think we ought to give something, certainly not the whole. Because you're talking about, I think they want to build other houses the same as the one that's comparable.
Yeah, Annalise's house is currently being used as a workspace and a meeting space, and giving these adults that are watching these folks some time off, allowing them to drop their kids or adult children off and they're trying to find work, so they develop the area above the garage as a big workspace, and they're assembling things and doing things to earn money. And learning social skills and things like that. But the point being, there's nobody living in that house. And so what they're looking for now is a place for these folks to actually live. Commissioner Tufano.
I'm assuming we're addressing these questions here on the screen.
Yes, sir.
If that is the case, as I said when we were opening, that we can't consider the affordable funding for housing as an isolated case. And it has to be in the context of what's happening throughout the town and all of our needs. So consequently, I'm not prepared to support any of these options without further additional information. I need to know to the penny what it's going to cost to turn the key at fire station number 3. I need to know what the salary study is going to be for our town employees. I need to know the return from the Urban Institute and any other considerations that have to be made, in addition to formal proposals from each of these people, each of these organizations. Right now, we're just talking in generalities. So we can't make, in my opinion, we can't make a decision of such scope without any concrete information supporting that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Tufano, but I will remind you that the majority of our board has indicated that they support spending $1.5 million in some shape or form for affordable housing.
If my understanding was correct, that was earmarked. That wasn't a commitment.
But we went around the room today. I spoke to Commissioner McCool, and obviously he's the one that really pushed for this. He supports it. I support it. Commissioner Garner supports it. Commissioner Whitley, and I believe Urban. I can count you in that as well. Do you support?
I will all support consensus.
So
correct, but
so regardless of other needs of the town, we think this is really important.
Interesting. Thank you for that comment.
Okay.
I think to help in this moment, what we're hoping for out of today is certainly not expenditure commitments. So I think it's abundantly clear that this is kind of the first of many conversations. I think where things get a little convoluted for us as staff is we received 3 unsolicited proposals. We didn't ask for these. These organizations heard about the earmark that the town had made, and they have brought forth and raised their hand and said, please, we would like a piece of that. And so, in looking at the 4 options, the kind of 4 pathways that were laid out that fit within what we're allowed to do under state statute, as an example, with pathway 1 for critical home repair, sounds like there's good support to continue to consider that. I think the question that would be helpful for us so that we can kind of continue to move forward is we have an unsolicited proposal from Habitat for Humanity that lists that exact program. So is there desire by this board to continue to engage with Habitat specifically for that program specifically to understand better how they could potentially administer that program for the town for some yet to be determined portion of the 1.5? Or does this board want to back up and say, thank you very much, but we want to double check that you are in fact the best provider of this program for the community. Therefore, we would like to do a formal RFP process to understand, are there other providers in the game? Do we want staff to investigate a town administered program instead of partnering with another agency? so that we know, should we be engaging with Habitat, or do we need to back up and provide a formal proposal framework so that they're answering X, Y, and Z questions, but also provide anybody else the same opportunity to do that. Because right now, these are letters. These are not, they're very broad requests. And so we don't have the specifics of how that program could potentially work with Habitat or somebody else who might be out there able to provide it. So that would be very helpful for us to know, kind of, do you want the RFP to kind of back up and Habitat can then respond to that if they're still interested? Or are you comfortable saying they're here, we know them, we like them, we would be comfortable not kind of double checking with the landscape before we continued those conversations with just them?
Yeah, for me, I think to be the best stewards of these funds, it makes sense to do the RFP process, despite the fact that Habitat is extremely well known and has done a great job with the funding they've received. Commissioner Urban, do you have a comment?
But one is, I agree with Commissioner Garner in terms of, we've been waiting for the Urban Institute report. We got that sort of midterm report. I'd like to see the end all be all, because there might be that aha moment, like, we didn't think about this. I think though that we definitely could be, I don't see there's any harm in starting to develop policy about future zoning cases and future policies that talk to housing and how we address single family home division and apartments. I mean, I don't see why, if the board sets a policy, then apartment developer comes into town and says, hey, they want 10% at 80% AMI, and it's done. I don't see how that's harmful, but the RFP process, I think, to be thoroughly transparent, there may be another organization out there that this is their wheelhouse. They're not familiar that we're looking to entertain this, or again, Habitat steps up and fills in all the blanks and we go in that direction.
You know, I recall discussing this many years ago, and I thought we were told that we could not do that for legality reasons. And I remember making the comment to Mr. Buckley, why can't we do it if other communities are doing it? And I believe the answer was that they had received special authority from the legislature. I don't know that we can say, if you're going to come in and build 300 apartments, you have to make 20% of them.
You can make I think you can make a policy.
Maybe a policy, but a
statement.
law, an
Yeah,
ordinance.
policy statement. But
not
policy
allowed.
goes a long way of setting the tone. And it's up to the 7 individuals up here in terms of a conditional zoning
Yeah, I
as
understand.
to how much they lean on that policy.
But we got to be careful.
Yeah,
You're aware
no,
with the legislature.
I've been down that road. I know. Yeah.
Well, and on the policy front, we do expect that is going to be a key component of the Urban Institute's study, where that was one of the specific asks out of that was what North Carolina specific, because we've heard some great examples of what they're doing in Pennsylvania or not other places that are just, they have totally different set of allowances of what policies or changes to our code and zoning ordinances would they recommend to help move the affordable housing needle on that administrative side that in theory isn't going to cost the town anything but some time to update some of our codes. So that is kind of affordable housing 2.0 in our mind of one of the outcomes that we would expect to be able to engage in once we do get the full study back from the Urban Institute.
And I think we owe it to the solicitor to respond to the Laurel Street inquiry as well. And I know Commissioner Whitley can't discuss this because it's at Mount Moriah. And as much as I love that project, I think it is a conflict of interest for our board to fund that. That's what Mr. Buckley has advised. Are there any other comments on that? Commissioner Garner?
I'll weigh in on that, and then a little bit about what other towns have done in North Carolina. So, I don't see what prevents us from going to the county and advocating for this Laurel Street project.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If Charlie, is telling us that we need to be careful and probably not enter that contract, then I would be willing to advocate in other ways or to make sure it happens, because I do feel like it is a very important project.
Absolutely.
The towns that have in their ordinances, I believe there are 4 towns in North Carolina that have affordable housing in their ordinances, and Davidson, Duck, is it Chapel Hill, and one other. I can't remember. It's been a while since I looked into it, but I believe right now each of those 4 are under lawsuits with developers over those ordinances. And so it would benefit us to wait and see what happens with those lawsuits, Davidson being the closest, and having a good relationship with them, we could see what the outcome is and understand what they've learned from the process. But having a policy and asking questions and asking developers what they'll contribute to our need is one thing, but then being really careful, I think, to have it written down as a stringent rule is putting us at risk.
Jay, do you or Becky, do you know if those 4 towns received special authority from the legislature? They did. So because that's what Charlie told us before. You could make it a policy, but you can't write an ordinance that says, hey, 20% or 10% of your housing. We're not allowed to do that. Mr. Camp.
Was going to add, and Commissioner Urban's brought this up in the past with density bonuses. As I understand it, how Charlotte's ordinance is set up is that it's optional. So it's a little bit similar to our park and rec fees in lieu, is that you can do, say, 10 to 15 units per acre by the UDO standard. If you want to go above and beyond, it gives you the option to provide affordable units, or you pay into the city's housing trust fund. I'm really generalizing this. I'd have to go back and look at it. So I think programs like that, regardless, as opposed to it being compulsory, which I think that's what Davidson tried to do, is said, no, you just have to provide the affordable housing. So I think there are ways to structure your policies and ordinances that can keep you out of legal troubles, but we just have to be, I think, very careful in how we look at that, hopefully in 2023.
Something we might want to do, I think Becky and I have very good relationships with the town managers and town mayors in the county. Maybe we have a summit, particularly with Davidson or Cornelius. I mean, if we think we have a problem with affordable housing, look at Cornelius, who I think their average house is like $750,000 or something. So, but we certainly have very good relationships with all the 6 towns of Mecklenburg County outside of Charlotte, and I think they would be maybe meet with them and discuss lessons learned, because every one of them, I can assure you, I know Becky meets with the town managers and I meet with the mayors, and affordable housing is a regular topic of conversation that every time we get together.
Is there a consensus with the Laurel Street proposal to follow what Commissioner Garner suggested, and that it's advocacy with the county as opposed to continuing to entertain it? Do we just want to table it for right now until we have clearer policies on how we are a funding partner? I think, again, we're just looking for how do we respond back to this organization at this point in time?
Yeah, I'm aware that they have a $500,000 gap that they need to make up, and I would personally be willing to, advocate for that as hard as possible from the county and see if we can get the extra money there. We absolutely want that project to go forward. It's the most exciting thing we've had about affordable housing in the town ever. So we don't want that to fail because there's a $500,000 gap. I don't know if anybody else has a comment. Commissioner Garner, I'm sure you have a comment on it.
Comment is that was rude. No, I agree.
I would say that's a great idea for us to advocate for the county and see if we can help with that, and any other ways we can as well.
Any other comments? Okay. As far as Rainbow Express Ministries, quite frankly, they don't quite clearly fit into any one of the pathways as kind of presented, where it didn't indicate, at least in their letter, that there were that there was other funding coming their way other than just private fundraising. I guess the question at this point in time is, do we just park it and say we don't have enough information? We want to get the policy in place as far as if we are going to be the funding gap closer, do we set that policy and then revisit Rainbow Express to see how they fit into that or not? We're again just not sure how to respond to them at this point in time.
Again, I'm probably more than anybody on the board, perhaps Commissioner Whitley, he's also familiar with this solicitor, but I would really like to see us do something to help this organization, because the work they do is so important. And yes, they've raised a lot of money from private funds they have, but they don't have enough. I mean, we know that these two homes are probably going to cost close to $500,000 a piece. They need like $1 million. So they certainly didn't raise $1 million or even a portion of that during their fundraiser recently. So they definitely need the money. Do we need more information? We need more information from all of the solicitors about specifically, how they would use the money, how we would validate what they're using the money for, et cetera. But these organizations, all three of them, are so well known, and their reputation precedes them. I think I would not like to see us totally park personally Rainbow Express. I think they just have such an important mission that is widely overlooked. Admittedly, I think myself, I didn't realize how many people fall in this category and what the need is in Matthews. It's pretty substantial. Commissioner Tufano, and then I'll go to Commissioner Whitley.
Yes, to reiterate, every one of these needs consideration, but I would like, for instance, in the case of Rainbow Express, to know explicitly how they're going to use these funds, right down to the penny. In other words, purchase land, construction, home repairs, et cetera, et cetera. Also, and I also agree with the mayor in terms of the mission that they have, and not to say anything negative about it, because I'm in agreement with it, but does it fit into what we're trying to do? I think this whole conversation opened up in terms of helping the low-income workers in this town, and to take a large portion of what the board has committed to one particular item that may not fit within that purview, I think it requires some really in-depth study. So in any of these, to make sure that we know explicitly every penny that's going to be spent and how it's going to be spent before, I think, in my personal opinion, I would be able to consider any of these proposals.
Thank you. So I do know that the ask, and Commissioner Whitley, I'll get to you in a second, the ask is specifically to build a home. I think they already own the land. The ask is for construction funding to build homes for those with developmental disabilities. And I think that fits exactly in low income, because clearly these folks are not able to generate large incomes due to their developmental disabilities. So they're low income people that need a place to live. And I think the paradigm has always been to rely on their parents to take care of them forever. And these folks are becoming aged, and it's becoming more and more difficult. So I think this demographic are low income people by nature that need a place to live. And so I think they do fall under this purview. Commissioner Whitley?
Yeah, I agree with you, Mayor. And mine is this, this is a group that I think needs our attention. I know they asked for all that we have, but certainly we're new in this. And I think that we ought to do something to help them. And you can't buy the whole house at one time, but we could contribute something along with what they've already raised, so they can get enough to maybe start on one. It's a group home, is all it is, where they can have so. And I'm familiar with a lot of them because I've attended I think twice luncheon with them, and they waited on me. But there's a special group of people, and I have compassion. I have compassion for the parents that have kids with disabilities, but they are human beings. And this is an area, I think it's an area for the town of Matthew to shine. That we can reach out to that group and be some part of this fund that we have. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and to reiterate and to Commissioner Fano's concern, I'm not necessarily advocating that we give them $1.5 million, but I'm just saying I think we should support them in some way with some portion of this funding. Commissioner Garner. Commissioner Urban.
Okay. I'm more than happy to willing to continue to look at it because I think about ZABs and I think about the fact that we have a depleted workforce. And there seems to be that opportunity for those with disabilities to be able to in that workforce and willing to be in that workforce. They really relish in being in it. And so if this group home is dedicated to occupational therapy and things like that, is to get them back into the workforce, that really counts a lot in my mind. If it's just a matter of a group home to have them sit there and sort of placate them, that's not a good thing. What it sounds like is they're doing very much like occupational therapies and things of that nature to get them out there. It's very similar to what Nate does, but Nate more is it's an older demographic. It really is more of an adult daycare scenario. I think that would be a different conversation. So I'm more than happy, but I really do want to see that study before we get too far.
Commissioner Garner, do you have a comment?
Thank you. I do. So one question is for Jay, and if this is and this is probably way into the weeds and doesn't really matter, but we're talking about creating 3 or 4 group homes. And I recently asked Jay about transitional homes for sober living. There are ordinances about how close they can be together. And is this even something that, how much they'll have to go through rezoning, I'm assuming, and there will be, a whole series of events that take place in order to be able to build this, or no?
Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to weigh in. We've been working with them on their location. They have office space. It's zoned residential. They've told us kind of about their plan, and we run into this a lot around town. And I think I alluded to this in my email back to you, that there's a fine line sometimes with what's classified by the state as a group home and what is just 4 individuals living in a house together. Whether there's actually someone that lives in that serves, that helps out folks living there, or people living there unassisted. Because if it were, say, 3 houses with 4 people living in each house individually with like no one else living there, like a caretaker or whatever you want to call it, that meets our zoning requirements. But if it's classified as a group home, there is an 800-foot separation distance in the town in our code, so that you don't have multiples, side by side. So the short answer is there's likely a very strong likelihood that they need to go through a rezoning. I would like to better understand Charlie's concern about conflict of interest if we are providing funding to an entity that's also going through a rezoning, like which was brought up with Mount Moriah. I think we need to better understand that if you are considering funding for Rainbow Express.
I think Charlie's concern with the conflict with Laurel Street was the fact that it benefits in some way Mount Moriah Church, of which Commissioner Whitley is the senior pastor. Lori Little is not affiliated with the town.
Okay.
So that, I don't want to speak for Charlie. He can speak,
right?
But I'm fine. I think it would be helpful to revisit what his concerns are by the whole board, so that we're all clear. What I'm hearing, and I'll get to you just one second, what I'm hearing as a general consensus is that there's interest in gathering more information. We don't have enough information to say, yeah, we want to do this. I know one of the reasons, and I kind of pushed Becky to have this meeting, is we have this funding and it's just sitting there and we could be helping people. So we wanted to do something, but proceeding with caution, several of you have suggested, is not a bad idea either. We don't have to do this immediately. Commissioner Garner?
I just was going to finish my point on the homes for people with different abilities and how they play into our town and affordability. And not only is it, creating an affordable housing situation, but also I think as we start meeting the needs of people, and part of our bond project will certainly assist in in making it easier for people to use the bus and get off at stops in downtown. We're going to see more businesses like Bear Foods and Sabs, Rainbow Express serving at the Methodist Church. We'll see more and more people coming to Matthews because we can meet the needs of people who have certain needs. So while it maybe it doesn't fit that initial sort of service industry sector, it is creating a special niche for Matthews when you start working on those services and growing them. You know, I know a lot of the blind community enjoys Matthews because of the ability to get around. This will certainly play into that and grow that for people.
Commissioner Hoover.
As for Rainbow Express, in my opinion, I think it fits in the affordable housing. Having a dear friend with a child that has special needs, I see it and know what this family goes through. And this child is in high school right now. So, you know, with that, but a day will come when something like this is needed. So, but yeah, for me, I would like to learn more about, you know, everything that they're doing, but it does fall into affordable housing for me.
Becky.
So I think what I'm hearing about this particular request is certainly the interest to know more, and it may be kind of a one-off because of this special population that it seems to target. So, you know, I think where I'm very comfortable is as staff, we can certainly take the lead in engaging them in some additional conversations to better understand the funding model, both on the front end to get them to construction, and then also better understanding their continuing funding model, given that this is a new space that they are entering into in providing housing. That's not something that this nonprofit is currently doing. So how do they plan to support the ongoing costs associated with providing a service like this? I think also then we can bring some recommendations to the board as far as if the board does want to continue to consider Rainbow Express, is it perhaps a we close the gap kind of a model where they need to raise up to whatever point of money, you know, then the board would be willing to maybe come in and meet whatever's remaining. Because kind of the last thing you might want to do is if you were to give them an allocation now that didn't fully meet their need, then town funds are sitting there while they're continuing to try to fundraise. If they were to not be successful in meeting their fundraising goals, where does that leave us in terms of what the town has tied up, and kind of how do we manage that? I think it sounds like there's a parallel process with, they may need to get through rezoning. So making sure that if that is going to be successful, that is completed. Because if it's not, then their vision and perhaps their needs would also need to change. So we can continue to engage with them as a one-off while we're kind of waiting for some of these other pieces like the housing study and all of those to come back.
Great points. Thank you, Commissioner Whitley.
Yeah, you know, we've sit on this money for a year and a half, and it's allotted for affordable homes. We have some requests from Rainbow and from Habitat. We know what Habitat does. We can't meet all their needs. And Becky, you know, my point on what you just said is filling the gap. I don't want to fill the gap. I wanted to give us something to help them and let them fill the gap, because I don't know, you know, how long it take them to build one house or one group home. But I would like for us to, after we get the urban report back, because thanks to January, we're getting in January, so we all talk to a month later. But then I think, you know, we sitting on this affordable home money, and it's a critical time. And, you know, I think we ought to spend that and then move forward. And then when we come talking about the other project, we'll meet those needs. But I think this deserves special attention for all around.
Yeah, just a final comment, and this is kind of tangential to the conversation, but at the Rainbow Express dinner where so much information was shared, one thing that really touched my heart and having, you know, two healthy children is an appreciation for those that have children with developmental disabilities. And they told the story of multiple parents that have not taken a vacation in 25 or 30 years, have basically not left their house because they have to watch their children continually. And so, and this opportunity, and also the comment was made that so many of these adult children are aging themselves. I mean, some of these folks are in their 40s and 50s. They need a place to live after mom and dad are no longer an option. So again, I think this is important. What I'm hearing from everybody, and it's wise counsel, is that we need more information. So I don't think we want to park it, but we want to get more information and proceed as soon as possible. But after we receive the Urban Institute report and more definitive information on how the money will be spent. And again, for me personally, I'm not necessarily saying that we should give them X number of dollars, but I do think that they definitely merit our consideration for some portion of these funds.
And we will also, based on the feedback from all of you, be proceeding with the RFP for critical home repair to better understand what partners in the community would be prepared to be able to administer that program for some as yet to be determined amount. So that is something that we can actively pursue to be able to start to get some dollars out the door.
To Commissioner Tufano's point, several churches, including Matthews United Methodist, have men's and women's groups that do these type of repairs, that do them as inexpensively as possible. That may really stretch the funds. So we should consider those as well.
And we could certainly put some strings on it. So, you know, perhaps the town's dollars was focused on the air conditioning units and the roofs, or, you know, things that may be required, the technical tradesman type of work, which then would allow the men's groups or some of the private entities that are maybe doing some of the smaller projects. That's still something that they're able to do. And we're kind of focusing our dollars on maybe the high dollar critical home repair needs that may exceed the scope of what a private group is able to produce.
Yeah, it's typically air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and roof, as Commissioner Urban knows. I mean, the roofs go and your house is leaking and it becomes no longer habitable. I recall when I worked in Pageland, South Carolina, there was a home on the edge of town down there in Pageland that had a hole that was probably as big as this area in between us here in their roof, and they just had tarps over it, and there were 6 or 7 children living in that home in the wintertime. Can you imagine? I mean, how cold the house was and wet and terrible. So Commissioner Tufano.
Yeah, one last comment on that. A lot of these larger churches have within their organization, in their men's group, professional contractors, electricians, plumbers, general contractors. And it serves not only the purpose of helping the needy in their community, but also they're great mentoring groups for young men. And a lot of these guys bring their children to these work groups with them. And it's really an incredible opportunity for them to see what it's like to give of yourself back to the community. And that's the reason why I initially brought it up, is because it's one thing to just give money, but it's another thing to give of yourself. And I think one of the great opportunities we have in this town right now with this, working with private and faith-based organizations, is the opportunity for us as citizens to give back to these people on a personal level. And also one last note about Habitat for Humanity and their refurbishing and maintenance. They gave a wonderful presentation to the American Legion here recently. They have wonderful veterans programs. And part of that is to actually fix the homes that they have given to veterans for Habitat for Humanity. And so they have a whole staff of people that do nothing but home repair. And so it's that organization is already in place. So I consider them almost a faith-based organization as well. You know, it's faith in the community, faith into their fellow man. And so as much as we can get that participation, I think we would be better off as a community and also as individuals. Thank you.
Yeah, I think something that Becky said earlier regarding as far as stretching these funds, being able to make these major repairs and allowing someone to stay in their home where they're maybe if they're still paying a mortgage, maybe their mortgage is $500 a month. That is going to be the least expensive option for them. They're not. What other option do they have? They can't even rent an apartment, a one-bedroom apartment for $1,500. So it seems like a really good opportunity for us to use some of these funds for that. I check that as one of my top initiatives that I would like to see us do, is to rehabilitate housing in some manner, partnering or whatever. But I think that would really, to Commissioner Urban's point, stretch those funds to the maximum instead of benefiting 2 or 3 families, and that's it. So I think it's a huge opportunity, and again, it's just breaks my heart, particularly when I hear about people in Matthews that are being ripped off or having to move from their home because they can't afford to replace the roof or something. That's something we should be able to help with. Leah, what else do we have? Questions? Can we go home? That's the question I have. No, does anybody does anybody have any questions? I'm glad we set aside this opportunity to speak just about affordable and attainable housing, because it's so important, and it took us 2.5 hours to get to this point. Are there any questions or final comments? I think everybody participated and had good input.
One last thing.
Sure.
Should we set a goal and actually a time frame for when we're going to get back together and have the next meeting on this subject?
Well, I certainly think it would be after what I keep hearing over and over as we went the Urban Institute report, and that's coming in January. But Becky, or Malia, do you have a comment on that?
I'd like to maybe put our heads together with staff. There's a couple of different takeaways that I think are different timelines. So there's a few things that I do think are going to wait until after we get the Urban Institute report back, which we're being told is January. We hope is January. But in the meantime, staff can be working on putting together the RFP for critical home repair. And we can, if that gets completed beforehand, that's something that this board can review before we would issue it. And then also this investigation into a potential subsidy program for Matthews employees, or maybe, can it be expanded to teachers and nurses working in the community? Just trying to understand what other programs might be out there that we could model after. Until we kind of go out digging, it's hard for me to know exactly what we're going to find. But I would say we could at least do a touch point on sort of where we stand on these things in conjunction with the report back from the Urban Institute, and then figure out, does it make sense to get something scheduled to do another separate meeting like this where we can continue to dive in on these, or can we divide up some of these areas since they start to go down different paths and are these 5:30 meetings? Really, we can put that together, but I think at least that Urban Institute report is kind of the big road marker that we're looking for.
I know we've had at least initial responses to our unsolicited solicitors. Can we follow up with them again and let them know that we've had this meeting and just because I'm sure all of you run into Lori Little or Natisha, and they hey, what's going on with our request? So it'd be good to just follow back up with them and let them know that we haven't forgot about them and we're still discussing it. So any other comments or questions before we wrap up today? Commissioner Tufano.
I just would personally like to commend Leah for what an incredible job she did right out of the chute. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Absolutely. We're blessed to have Malia and are employed by Matthews. Thank you. You did a great job. Anything else? Everybody have a great day. Keep Ken in your thoughts. Again, he's I'm hoping that he's not injured beyond what we know. And again, he's in Pardee Hospital up in Hendersonville. I wasn't on the microphone earlier, so if anybody watching at home, Mayor Pro Tem Ken McCool was in an auto accident yesterday. He's okay with it, but he's got a concussion and some other internal injuries, and we're be thinking about him.
The name of that hospital?
It's Pardee, Pardee. It's in Hendersonville, North Carolina. And I don't know, he remarkably, his other two passengers were not hospitalized. It's unbelievable, but he had a severe concussion. I don't know how much longer he's going to be in the hospital, but maybe you could text him and let him know you're thinking about him. That would be, I'm sure, appreciated. All right, everybody have a great day. See you Monday.